Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're out at the range to have a serious discussion about recent events where the CEO of United Healthcare was shot in New York City by an assassin. Now there's been a lot of speculation out there about the type of firearm and suppressor that was used, and there's been a lot of commentary out there, and some of it I might agree with more than others, and that's what today's video is about. Our take based upon our decades of experience, combined experience, heck, decades on my own, I'm literally that old, of experience, and applying that to what we know, what we've seen in the video that has been shared publicly so far, and kind of talk about some of those theories that are bouncing around the internet. Some of the ones we might agree with and some of those which we don't agree with. So that's what today's video is about. Yes, this is the B&T Station Six. We're going to talk about this in today's video because this was one of the first guns that everybody automatically assumed that the shooter was using. But there might be some problems with that. Let's get into today's video. If you watch the Military Arms channel, you know we use and trust RMA armor quite a bit here on the channel. It's the lightest American-made level 4 plate in its price range that you're going to find out there at $249.99. It uses a Dyneema backer, and you may have heard of them before. They're famous for not just lightweight body armor, but its widespread use in ultralight strong backpacking and hiking equipment out there, including rock climbing type applications and other industrial applications. It's 100% made in the United States from American-made materials, and it is multi-hit M2AP performance rated. Has a 10x12 coverage area, but there's a number of different options available, but you do get edge-to-edge protection, which you're not going to find from some of the cheaper armor plates that are out there. So check out RMA armor. We definitely like them here at the Military Arms channel, and we've tested them and give them the thumbs up. Almost immediately online, theories started to circulate that the gunman was using this Station 6 by B&T. That's what I have here. Now this is a clone, if you will, but not really, but sort of. It's definitely inspired by a handgun called the Well Rod that was used during World War II at chambered .32 ACP. It had, a suppressor on it that used wipes, and so people thought, well, it probably was the B&T because of the actions you see of the shooter. The shooter was struggling with the firearm because it wasn't working properly, in my opinion. If he was using a B&T Station 6, it would have been working properly because this is a manually operated pistol. And I think that's why the speculation this was the handgun he used. I think that's why the speculation started, was because you saw him working the gun. He fired, the gun didn't cycle itself. He would do something with the gun and bring it back up and fire again. But was it the Station 6? Well, let's take a look at a few factors. Now, the guns, when they were sold as a complete kit. A handgun, which is just a handgun, 4.47 3-form, and with it came a suppressor. And that suppressor would have had wipes in it, just like the original Well Rod. And this is that wiped suppressor, okay? Uses 1/2x28 threads. This is the wiped can. We'll talk about that here in a moment. But also available for the gun, I think you had to purchase them separately, was the training can, which is nothing more than a conventional baffled suppressor. Has baffles in there, fairly low volume, but we've done a whole video on this handgun. We tested the sound levels between the two cans, and it works just fine as a suppressor. But this was also available. The advantage to this is it doesn't have wipes. Wipes will burn out anywhere between 10 to 20 shots, depending on the type of ammunition you're using. If you're using hollow points versus ball rounds, if you're using supersonics versus subsonics, all this affects the lifespan of a wipe. And a wipe is just basically, think of material like a conveyor belt, just really, really heavy rubber that is stacked, 3 or 4 of them in the can, and the bullet has to pass through, physically pass through, punch a hole through that rubber each time it goes to a different chamber, trapping the gas behind the bullet. It's basically acting like a baffle, but it's physically touching the bullet where a baffle does not. And that has certain benefits to it, which we'll talk about here momentarily. But right now I have the training can with baffles on it because I want to show you, without burning up my wipes, how this gun operates. So the Station 6 is not a semi-automatic pistol. It's a manually operated lock-breeched pistol, meaning every time you fire the gun, you have to cycle the bolt, rotate it, pull it rearward, push it forward, lock it, fire, and repeat the cycle every time. The gun is not the smoothest operating firearm out there. And by that I mean many times you have to do, deliberately crank on it, jerk that to the rear, slap it forward to get it to properly eject and feed. It's not something you can just gingerly, rotate like this and expect it to function. Many times you'll see the operators of these pistols invert the pistol when they cycle the fired case out because the ejector is so weak that if you try to do it vertical, the case will just fall right back into the action and cause a malfunction. So generally you'll see the gun turn sideways at a minimum. I like to almost completely invert it just to keep that from happening. You bring it back up and reload. But again, it takes a very deliberate action. But we do see the gunman messing with the pistol, and we'll talk about that in future segments when we talk about other pistols. I don't think it was the B&T. And the first giveaway, if you watch that video, is a plume of gas when he fires the first shot. Here I have some just regular 115 grain ball ammunition from Federal. I want to thank our friends at Federal for supplying the ammunition free of charge to the channel. I just put the magazine into the gun to load it, pull the bolt to the rear, push it home, rotate it and lock it, and now it is ready to fire. Right here is the breech, okay? Watch the gun when I fire it. What you will not see is a plume of gas above it because it's sealed. You have the brass case in here and a locked breech. It's sealing it. All that gas is going out the end of the barrel and the suppressor. None of it would escape here, but we saw that happen in the actual video, which tells me it was a delayed action, a semi-automatic pistol and not a single shot like the Station Six. Watch that ejection port. Okay, now to cycle it, you have to rotate it, turn it upside down, pull it sharply to the rear, all that, just to fire another round. So that's how the Station Six works. That plume of gas, not likely. The fact that I have to rotate the pistol for it to be even reliable, I'm not shaking out spent cases trying to clear malfunctions. The fact that he kept the gun upright and was just doing jerking movements and tapping the back of it, that indicates to me that there was a semi-automatic pistol that wasn't functioning properly, and there's a reason or reasons for that possibility. But the police at New York State did say that they thought it was a B&T pistol because one was for sale in Connecticut and apparently it's sold, and that's why the police are saying they think it was a B&T, maybe from the video evidence. I still don't think that's the case, just because that doesn't align with what I saw in that video. And I own this pistol and have for quite some time. So I'm going to say my opinion is the police got it wrong. The chances of him going out there and filling out NFA paperwork, submitting that to the FBI and ATF, waiting for approval, going back, picking it up, having his photograph, fingerprints, and name all over it, knowing he's going to go commit a crime like that, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I'm going to go with, if it was a Station Six, it was probably stolen. No paperwork was done. It didn't come from a gun store where he filled out paperwork. It may have been stolen from somebody that owned one, but I still don't think it was a Station Six. Now, if you put the wiped can on here, so let's go ahead and mount the wiped can. You can see the wipe there on the end. The bullet comes into physical contact with that. It operates much the same way that a baffle would, if you understand the basic operating principle of a suppressor. Wipes act as baffles. It comes from over 100 years ago. Early suppressors used them, probably because manufacturing techniques at the time weren't such that you could reliably mass produce a suppressor that got the tolerances needed and the precision needed to effectively, produce a whole bunch of them in volume, so wipes were used. They're economical, easy to do, and easy to replace. And it was just kind of the thing back then. Fast forward to 2024, wipes are nostalgic. They do have certain purposes, but nobody wants to mess with them because each individual wipe is considered an NFA item in and of itself. You can't just have a bag of wipes legally to replace them when they burn out after 10 or 20 shots. So it's really not very handy, which is why I have the training can so I can actually shoot the gun and enjoy it. But there are benefits, and let's take a look at that next. Take 115 grain Federal ball, standard range ammunition. And we'll load one round into the Station Six. Like that. We'll set our chronograph to pistol. And fire one round at the berm over there. Let's see if we can get ourselves some velocity data. All right, so 1,151 feet per second, which is definitely supersonic. All right, now we will take the baffled can. This has no wipes. This is a traditional baffled can. Take one round of 9mm, 115 grain ball. $11.61. So what do we see there? We saw a slight increase in velocity. And this is something we've documented before. There's a lot of misinformation about suppressors out there on the internet claiming that suppressors slow the bullet down. Baffled cans like this. And as you can clearly see, that's not the case, okay? Go ahead and unload it here really quick. Now the B&T Station 6 does require some very deliberate movements there. We're going to take the baffled suppressor off. And this is the can with the wipes. All right, so we'll put the wiped can on. Load one round of the same 115 grain ball into the gun. Last velocity, 1161. .958. Did you hear that? I don't know if you could hear it on the audio, but it was like the gas bleeding out of the can. These things can be so temperamental, as you can see. And with one shot, there's not much change to the wipe. All right, so as we can tell from that video, the supersonic bullet, when it passed through the wiped can, the velocity was reduced of that 115 grain bullet down to around 950 some feet per second. That is subsonic, so it took an 1150 feet per second round and brought it down to well under 1000 feet per second, making it subsonic. That means even with 115 grain supers, this thing is going to be literally whisper quiet. I mean, it has the velocity of a 380 at this point. The sound is so quiet. I mean, it is incredibly quiet. And that is one of the benefits to the fact that it's using wipes. Those wipes truly seal behind the bullet, trapping that gas more effectively than a baffle, which just lets the gas flow behind the bullet and restricts its flow, but doesn't trap it. Wipes trap it. So, downside, NFA item. Another downside is because it's physically touching bullets, the accuracy can suffer. But when you're talking about 7 yards or less, the accuracy really isn't that big of an issue. How quiet it is really impressive. So, the pros and the cons, but in the end, I honestly don't think it was the B&T Station 6. I'd be very surprised if that is the case, and that's what we find out when they actually catch this guy and they recover the firearm used. Now let's move on to some other firearms I think are more likely candidates for what this man used. All right, so now we have a CZ P10C 9mm handgun. This is a Black Hawk 9mm suppressor. This one has a booster on it, and this is critical information to trying to understand the video that we've all watched at this point. The gunman was working the action of the gun manually, which is why people thought perhaps it was a Station 6, because the gun was having functional problems. And from what I saw him doing when he was shooting, the motions weren't this in turning, like you would see with the B&T. The motions were bang, malfunction, clear, even a tap, which is common with a Browning action like this, and then resume firing. So this can has a booster on it. And what is a booster or a Nielsen device? If you look, when I pull on the can, you can see it kind of move away from the gun. There's a big spring inside of here. And this is going to be an oversimplification, but this is in essence what's happening. A Browning action, and all that means is that the barrel moves rearward with the slide as a delaying action, allow the bullet to get out of the barrel for gas pressures to drop before it opens up, so it can do so safely. And so the barrel and slide will move slightly rearward together, then the barrel will drop down, unlock, and then move rearward and eject the spent case. And you can see what I'm talking about right there. But all things mechanical, if you add additional weight to the end of the barrel, you're going to have to change something back here for it to work, potentially, or change something out here. You can lighten springs, use super lightweight suppressors and things like that to get around using a Nielsen device, but 90+% of those guns that are, or cans sold out there for 9mm like this are going to have that booster device. And in essence, it makes this extra weight on the end of the barrel that would otherwise cause the gun to malfunction to work, because the gases inside of the can cause the can to spring away from the gun at the moment of cycling, basically rendering the muzzle device, in this case the suppressor, weightless for a brief moment. And that allows the action to work with its regular spring and things like that. But it's also not uncommon to see people change recoil springs, even with cans running Nielsen devices. But that Nielsen device is critical for the function, reliable function of this handgun. Let me demonstrate. I have a few rounds of 115 grain ball, again, the same federal ammunition we're going to be using in this video. We do have some subsonics, just to make another point clear here in a moment, but I'm going to go ahead and load the weapon up. So now I have the boosted suppressor on the end of the gun, have a round of the chamber, and watch when it fires. Now you're not going to see a whole bunch of gas come out of it. That's generally because there's a bunch of oil in there. Maybe sometimes you will see some gas come out of the ejection port, but it's pretty windy today. We'll see. But first shot, and you can see the gun cycled just fine. It loaded itself so I can fire the next shot. And it's working as it should. And even locks open on the last shot fired. That's only possible because of that booster or Nielsen device. I'll just call it a booster going forward. So, because he was constantly, every shot, messing with the gun and doing what I believe were actions more like this or this than this, I'm more inclined to believe it was some type of a Browning action. A Glock, a CZ, a Smith & Wesson, just about every modern popular handgun in circulation these days uses some form of a Browning action. There are other types of pistols out there like the Beretta M9 that don't use a Browning action. There are fixed barrel designs out there that would work without a booster. None of that is relevant to today's conversation. So what we've just demonstrated is how a properly functioning suppressor married to a properly functioning handgun would work. We still don't know what pistol the man used. All right, so let's use a can, the same can, without a booster, and let me show you what the net result of that is. And this starts to look more closely like what we saw in the video. All right, same pistol, same suppressor, this time no booster. Has a fixed spacer in there so the can is fixed directly to the barrel. There will be no Nielsen or booster device making this thing weightless at the moment of firing. So what then happens? Tell me if this looks like what you saw in the video that was released by the police department. 115 grain ball, load the weapon up, fire a shot, malfunction. Okay? So what do you do to clear a malfunction like that? Well, you would just do what he did. And that's to manually operate the pistol. That's what happens to a Browning type action with a suppressor on it and no booster. And so we saw him operating the gun just like I showed you, either doing it this way or doing it this way. It's hard to tell from the video. It kind of looks like he was doing it this way. And that is very consistent with what we saw in the video. So he'd fire, the gun wouldn't work, he would do that. And we even saw him do this, which is common with people that are using a suppressed handgun and it doesn't quite go into battery because you didn't quite pull far enough back on the slide, or it just didn't quite make it all the way in, so you just want to make sure it's home, so it'll fire, because if it's not completely in battery, the gun won't fire. It needs to be whacked before it'll actually allow the user to fire it. So in my opinion, the most likely outcome is that he was using a Browning type action handgun and he had a suppressor that had no booster in it. So why would that be? Well, let's have a conversation about that too. While we're on the subject of Browning actions and suppressors, one of the comments I saw online on X was that, well, the reason the gun wasn't working was because he was using subsonic ammunition. I'm not sure where that comes from, but here's some subsonic ammunition. This is 147 grain ball ammunition, again, from our friends over at Federal. And there's the magazine right in my hand, and here they are loaded into the CZ's magazine. Now, subsonic, that means the bullet is not traveling at the speed of sound. It's a heavier bullet. The 147 grains allows it to stay under that velocity cap of right around 1100 or around 1050 feet per second or so, depending on atmospheric conditions and things like that, to be subsonic. All right, but let's see if it functions. Of course it functions. The guns are intended to work with subsonic ammunition because the whole point is to make the gun as quiet as possible. When a bullet doesn't break the sound barrier, it's more quiet. When a bullet does break the sound barrier, you get a crack down range that can be as loud as a gunshot in some instances. So it's very, very loud when a bullet breaks the sound barrier, even if the can is suppressing the gunshot itself. So subsonics take away that sonic boom and make the entire thing much more quiet. Now, there's been some speculation out there that perhaps he took supersonic rounds, pulled the bullets, dumped a little bit of powder out, reseated the bullet, and then made faulty subsonic rounds. I've seen that theory floated, and I think that's silly. I mean, good grief, just go buy subsonics. It's not like it's hard to come by. So I don't think that's what happened, but again, I just wanted to address that comment because I've also seen that circulating the internet. Now, keep in mind, I also want to make it pretty clear that getting a 9mm or any cartridge, it could have been a 40 Smith & Wesson or 45 the guy was using, we don't know, at least I don't, but getting them to work reliably with suppressors can be a bit challenging. Okay, some guns just don't like being suppressed. Others love being suppressed. Depends on the can, depends on the ammo, depends on the gun. So there can be problems that could be introduced into the system, but you would think that a professional, as some people have claimed that he was, you think a professional would go out and make sure that his weapon system was working before he went out to do his professional hit. Wouldn't you think? I do think he knew that the gun wasn't working because he seemed to be prepared for manually operating the pistol. But again, in my opinion, a professional would have had a working weapon to begin with. So going with my gut instinct here, and again, this is speculation even on my part. I'm not making any definitive statements in this video. I'm just simply trying to analyze what I saw in the video that was released publicly and compare that to comments I've seen made on Twitter, X primarily, and try to address those in today's video. So in my opinion, it's highly unlikely that the B&T Station 6 was the weapon used in this particular crime. What I do think happened was that this person, to their abilities, meticulously planned this crime. Why do I say that? Well, he had an e-bike for escape. He had an escape route, and that route took him through Central Park, where he ditched his backpack and probably other items. He knew where his target was going to be. He was in New York for a very specific meeting at a very specific time, and somehow this person knew that. On top of that, there were spent cases and maybe unfired cases because of malfunctions that were left on the ground that has become public information, where it is said that he had written things on those cartridges that would indicate that he personally had a beef with this CEO, that he had some gripe. He wasn't paid to go do this. He had some sort of revenge idea in his head, and that's most likely what took him there and caused this whole event to take place. So it seems to be personally motivated. I don't think he was a professional. I do think that he may have fired the firearm beforehand, realizing that his configuration didn't work, so he was prepared for that eventuality, and you saw him fairly effectively keep manually cycling the pistol. Now, one thing I also noticed in that video is the first shot that was taken, the plume of smoke, we talked about that, gives away the fact that it's most likely not the B&T, but also on that first shot, I noticed something. If you go back and watch the video, he raises the pistol at 7 yards or less, very close. My cameraman's standing closer to, or standing probably a bit further from me than his target was from him. And he raises the weapon. You can clearly see it's at chest level, like low shoulder level. And he fires, and I think I've even read news reports that he was hit in the left leg on the first shot. That would mean if it was aimed at the middle of his back and it hit him in the leg, it was feet low. And I've seen that happen before. And that's happened, in my experience, with cans that were not concentric to bore, meaning that the suppressor was not aligned with the bore, therefore the bullet impacted some part of the suppressor on the way out, causing the bullet to tumble and be wildly inaccurate, even at 7 feet. I've seen bullets be feet off target because of defectively manufactured silencers. So, how would you get a defectively manufactured silencer? Well, you can make it yourself. It's not rocket science, guys. These things are stupid, simple contraptions. You can print them 3D files you can download. You can go to a hardware store, pick up a bicycle pump and all the tools you need to make something like this. It's not hard to make one. Matter of fact, solvent traps. YouTube used to advertise them. You would see them on Facebook being advertised. And it was basically a silencer that it was just something you would screw on the end of your gun that they claimed would catch solvent. But in actuality, it was just basically everything you needed to manufacture your own suppressor. But if you were to purchase one of those, there's no guarantee that that contraption that you put together yourself, this solvent trap, that it would be concentric to bore. You could very likely get a bullet striking some part of that solvent trap that's been turned in or being used as a suppressor. So there's any number of ways he could have manufactured one or even purchased one illegally off the street. I suspect, given the meticulous nature of how he planned this crime out, he didn't want his name on a handgun, which excludes the B&T Station 6 because of the NFA paperwork. He probably went and got illegally a handgun, didn't do a 447.3 form, purchased it illegally out of the trunk of a car. It was stolen somewhere, most likely. And the suppressor was either stolen itself, was manufactured by him or somebody else, wasn't properly made, and had problems with it, which seems to would be indicated by the fact that that first shot went wildly off. And he had to take multiple shots, basically at point blank range, to finish the job. He walked right up on the guy towards the end of the video and put the last shot in him. So apparently there were accuracy issues with the firearm, which again leads me towards the idea that perhaps the suppressor wasn't a professionally manufactured suppressor like a B&T or this Black Hawk or a Silencer Co. Pick your brand, all right? So I don't think he was a professional. I don't think that he used some super expensive rare pistol in his crime. I think he probably picked up what he could get his hands on and do so illegally through illegal channels so his name wouldn't be all over it, because he's trying to cover up the fact he wanted to get away. He didn't just stand around and wait for police to arrive, all right? So in my opinion, more than likely a Browning type action, more than likely a can without a booster, and also a can that probably wasn't manufactured where it was concentric to bore, which caused accuracy issues that we saw in the video. So I'm interested in what you guys think. What do you think that he used? Do you think our assessment is correct? Do you think maybe he used something else that we've overlooked in this video? Please comment down below. I look forward to hearing what your thoughts are. If you'd like to support us here at the Military Arms Channel so we can continue to bring you content like this, please consider becoming part of our Patreon family. There's a link in the video description below. Right here on YouTube, you got the subscribe and thanks button underneath the video you're watching right now. Hit either one of those buttons and you can help support us here on YouTube in the age of demonetization. This video most definitely is going to get demonetized most likely. And also, please swing by and check out Copper Custom. Thank you for 16 years of support. We'll talk to you guys soon.